Truman leads a life that is far from genuine. Little does he know, the very place he calls home is an enormous studio, equipped with hidden cameras that capture his every move. The people surrounding him, whom he considers friends and acquaintances, are nothing but talented actors fulfilling their roles in the world's most popular TV series, The Truman Show. Truman is under the impression that he lives an ordinary life as an average man, oblivious to the exploitation he's enduring. But all of this changes in a single moment when he unexpectedly discovers the truth, unraveling the carefully hidden reality that has been carefully constructed around him.
Couple. The right knee.
This isn't going to be pretty unless your family.
If you want to stay in the loop and receive more exciting videos, make sure to subscribe, click the notification bell, and don't forget to like the video. Truman Burbank, portrayed by Jim Carrey, leads an idyllic and peaceful life as an insurance salesman on Seahaven Island. Unbeknownst to him, he is the unknowing star of the most popular live television show in history. The catch is that Truman is completely unaware of this fact. Seahaven Island itself is an elaborate fabrication, a massive set enclosed by a protective dome that meticulously replicates the sky, weather, and temperature of the outside world. The dome is managed by the artistically eccentric director, Christoph, played by Ed Harris, and hidden staff responsible for orchestrating the entire charade. Christoph has been filming Truman's life from the moment of his birth, seeing it as a unique project to capture a person's life continuously and innocently. Things take a turn on day 10,909 of Truman's life when a curious incident occurs. As Truman gets ready for work, he exchanges greetings with his neighbors across the street, as he always does. However, a mysterious object falls from the sky and lands near his car, leaving Truman puzzled. Strangely, the sky appears clear with no apparent explanation for the object, which is actually a studio light. Later, on his way to work, Truman hears a radio report claiming that an aircraft flying over the island lost some parts, leading him to believe that this explains the fallen object. Little does he know that this event marks the beginning of significant changes in his life. At work, Truman carefully tears pieces of paper from a magazine and hides them before making a call to Fiji to inquire about directory information. He asks for either Lauren or Sylvia Garland, but unfortunately, neither name yields any results. His boss, Lawrence, Peter Krause, approaches and assigns him the task of closing a deal on Harbor Island. Reluctantly, Truman leaves his desk, but as he reaches the pier, his fear of open water compels him to return to work. Back home, Truman spends some time gardening until his wife, Meryl, Laura Linney, returns from work with a cheerful smile. Later, he meets with his longtime friend, Marlon, Noah Emmerich. Truman opens up about his desire to leave Seahaven, quit his job, and travel to Fiji, reflecting his childhood dream of exploration. However, Marlon pretends not to know where Fiji is. In the evening, Truman sits alone on the beach, gazing out at the water. Memories resurface of a boating trip he took as a child with his father, and his request to stay at sea a little longer. Tragically, during a strong storm, Truman's father was swept overboard and drowned. As Truman snaps out of the memory, rain suddenly starts falling, but peculiarly, it only rains on him. Just then, the rest of the sky opens up, and rain pours down everywhere, prompting him to quickly rush home. At home, he shares his plans to go to Fiji with Meryl, but she dismisses the idea, emphasizing their financial responsibilities. Truman argues that the trip could be a thrilling adventure, but Meryl counters by suggesting that starting a family, like having a baby, could also be an exciting venture. The next morning, Truman spots a homeless man on the street who bears an uncanny resemblance to his father. Suddenly, numerous people and strange obstacles appear out of nowhere, and the homeless man is taken away before Truman can reach him. Later that day, Truman discusses this strange occurrence with his mother, Holland Taylor, but she refuses to believe any of it and dismisses the idea as wishful thinking. That night, Truman seeks solace in the basement of his home, where he begins exploring an old trunk filled with personal mementos. Among them, he finds a red sweater with a white pin that reads, "How will it end?" This triggers memories of his college days, where he and Marlon were part of the homecoming band. During that time, Truman becomes captivated by an attractive young woman across the courtyard. However, his attention is diverted when Meryl appears, and they become inseparable over the following month. One evening, while studying in the library, Truman spots the same young woman he had admired from the courtyard, named Lauren, Natasha McElhone. Despite her initial reluctance to speak with him, Truman takes a chance and asks if she would like to go out sometime. She responds with a single word written on a small piece of paper, "Now," and they both secretly rush out of the library together. Once outside, they head towards the beach to find a moment of privacy. However, their tranquility is interrupted when a vehicle approaches, and Lauren becomes anxious. She confesses that her real name is Sylvia and attempts to reveal the truth about the show to Truman. At that moment, her supposed father appears on the dunes and calls for her. He dismisses her claims as delusions, announcing that they are relocating to Fiji. Truman can only watch in bewilderment as they drive away, never to return. In the aftermath, he discovers the red sweater Sylvia left behind. As Truman comes back to the present from his memory, he reveals that he has been collecting scraps from a magazine to create a collage of Lauren/Sylvia's face as he remembers it. The following day, while driving to work, Truman notices something strange happening with his car radio, which starts broadcasting his every move. Unsettled by this, he chooses to walk around outside in the open air instead. Seeking refuge, he enters a building and finds himself facing an unexpected scene as the elevator doors open. He sees a studio filled with people wearing headphones and eating sandwiches. Before he can comprehend what is happening, security apprehends him and forces him out of the building for trespassing. Confused and disoriented, Truman walks to a nearby market where he spots Marlon's service vehicle parked. Truman attempts to share his recent experience with Marlon, but Marlon dismisses it as a joke, not taking him seriously. Determined to confide in his best friend, Truman pulls Marlon aside and reveals that he's planning to go away for a while. Upon returning home, Truman finds Meryl and his mother looking at old photos in an album. As they browse through the memories, the TV starts playing an old film called Show Me the Way to Go Home, seemingly trying to reinforce the idea of staying put and never leaving home. While observing the photo album, Truman notices a picture from his wedding day with Meryl. Upon closer inspection, he sees that her fingers are crossed, suggesting that Meryl did not enter the marriage truthfully. The next day, Truman visits a travel agency to book a flight to Fiji, but the agent informs him that there are no available flights for at least a month. Undeterred, he decides to take a bus to Chicago, but the bus breaks down before it can leave the station. When Meryl returns home from work, she finds Truman sitting in his car in the driveway, visibly fixated on something. She joins him in the car, but he asks her to stay silent as he starts predicting the appearance of each person passing by on the street. He notices that they seem to be following a fixed schedule, mentioning a lady on a red bike, a man carrying flowers, and a vintage Volkswagen Beetle with a dented fender. Concerned about his behavior, Meryl tries to reason with him, but he decides to test his theory further by driving down the street with her in the car, despite her insistence on returning home. As they reach a rotary, a sudden traffic jam appears, disappointing Truman. He decides to go around the rotary multiple times, hoping the cars will clear by the time he returns. Surprisingly, when he comes back, all the cars have vanished, and he continues towards the only bridge leading off the island. However, Truman's fear of water prevents him from driving over the bridge, so he closes his eyes and forces Meryl to take the wheel. Triumphantly, Truman cheers as Meryl tries to convince him to go back home. On their journey, they pass a sign warning of forest fires, and a line of flames crosses the road. Nevertheless, Truman persists and drives onward. Their car finally comes to a halt just beyond a power plant that appears to have experienced a meltdown. Men in hazmat suits approach the car, apologizing for the inconvenience. However, when one of them accidentally addresses Truman by his first name, Truman becomes suspicious and tries to escape. The men chase after him, capture him, and return him to the island against his will. Back home, Meryl tries to comfort a dejected Truman by offering him a new drink she bought. However, she does so in a promotional manner, as if she were in a commercial. This behavior confuses Truman, leading him to ask whom she thinks she's speaking to. He becomes more frantic and tries to convince her that something is seriously wrong with everything. Frightened, Meryl grabs a peeler and points it at Truman, telling him to keep his distance. When he disarms her, she calls for someone to stop him. In shock, Truman releases her and demands an explanation. Marlon suddenly appears at the door with a case of beer, and Meryl runs into his arms, crying that it's not professional. Marlon takes Truman outside, where they sit by the roadside and share the beers. Marlon tries to reassure Truman, claiming that if there was a massive scheme or conspiracy, he would have to be part of it too. He insists that he would never lie to Truman, but unknown to Truman, Christoph is feeding Marlon his words through an earpiece. Marlon then reveals the true reason for their meeting that night. They turn around to see a dark figure emerging from the mist, and as the person gets closer, Truman realizes that it's his long-lost father. Overwhelmed with emotion, Truman and his father embrace, with Christoph orchestrating the scene from above, capturing the moment of Truman's happiness on camera. Shortly after this heartwarming reunion, a new TV show titled True Talk begins, with a small screen in the corner showing Truman eating breakfast. Christoph is interviewed during the show, explaining the reasons behind various events on the show. He reveals that Truman's father's supposed death at sea was staged to instill a fear of water in him, ensuring he would never attempt to leave the island due to his childhood dreams of exploration. Bringing his father back was an attempt to pacify Truman and dissuade him from leaving. Christoph also shares that certain security measures were implemented after a few incidents, including one where a Truman fan hid in a Christmas present during Truman's childhood to get airtime. During the show, a caller with a familiar voice, Sylvia's, berates Christoph for deceiving Truman and trapping him in a fake life. In response, Christoph argues that the outside world is the real prison, and he believes he has provided Truman with a chance to live a normal life, free from pain and violence. He claims that if Truman were to discover the truth, he would be allowed to leave. The following day, Truman appears to be back to his usual self, seemingly content and unaffected by the recent events. After a day at work, where Truman meets his new co-worker Vivian, Meryl's appointed replacement as his potential female partner, he returns home and appears to rearrange some items in his basement, almost as if reorganizing his life. Strangely, Truman remains inactive for several hours, even when he should be awake, leading Christoph to grow suspicious as he watches the video feed. To test Truman's response, Christoph orders the phone in the house to ring, but Truman doesn't answer or move. Concerned, Christoph sends Marlon to check on him. Marlon enters the basement and uncovers Truman, only to discover a noise recorder and a gaping hole in the floor. Baffled by this unexpected development, Christoph makes a drastic decision. He cuts off the transmission, leaving the world in shock. With the transmission ceased, Christoph mobilizes the entire staff on the island to form search parties. As if playing God, he commands the sun to rise to aid in the search efforts. After exhausting the search on land, Christoph suggests an audacious idea: searching at sea. The cameras scan the ocean and eventually locate Truman on a lone sailboat, captaining it himself. Live video feeds continue, and Christoph orders one of the actors to retrieve Truman. However, as actors, none of them know how to sail a boat. Kristoff uses his weather program to simulate a storm, hoping to force Truman back to port. However, Truman defies the turbulence and yells to the skies in rebellion. Enraged, Kristoff increases the wind and chaos, putting Truman's safety at risk. Realizing that Truman won't back down, Kristoff eventually gives up on the weather manipulation and abandons the plan. Truman's victorious sail continues until a powerful impact rocks the boat. After collecting himself, he discovers that the ship's bow is lodged into the sky, signaling the end of the dome. Leaving the boat, he examines the wall and finds a short staircase leading to an exit door. Just as he reaches for the handle, Kristoff addresses Truman directly for the first time through the intercom system. Kristoff introduces himself as Truman's creator, who has been observing him since birth, and reveals that Truman's entire life has been entertainment for an audience beyond the dome. Kristoff attempts to persuade Truman to remain in his world, where he can live a content life without suffering or pain. He also tries to instill the idea that Truman is still deeply afraid of venturing further. Deep in thought, Truman finally speaks, realizing that the whole world is watching him. He looks up and says, "In case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night." With a bow, Truman leaves Kristoff, who is incredulous. Sylvia, overjoyed, leaps up from her living room floor and rushes out of her apartment, while the rest of the world cheers immensely at the dramatic finale of The Truman Show. Meanwhile, Kristoff, though saddened, remains firm in his decision. He removes his headset and ends the transmission.